On the previous post, I had a little pop quiz. It was trying to compare these two replica clubs. Which one was based on the older template? One is based on a circa 1800 club, one is based on an 1840 club. And in fact, this one is the late featherball era club, 1840s, and this is closer to the 1800 club. Now it's not 100%. This club could be actually a later club, past 1840, but these are kind of typical of what I would see at museums and things like that. So looking at the top view first, let's look at the four clubs. This is, I would call a pre-1750. This is around 1800. This is late featherball era, so 1840s, and this is, Kelly made this club, Kelly Leonard made this club. This would be 1880s. They're all different lofts, but pretty much these give a good general idea of the characteristics of these clubs. First thing you notice in terms of length is that the oldest club is the longest by far. This thing dwarfs the 1840s club. So this is based on a model or template of a troon club. I would make it better now that I've actually seen them in person, but at the time I didn't know better. So this is a very long club, and the length decreased over time until the late featherball era, and then the length kind of stayed the same until about the 1880s when the head started to get a little shorter. Next thing we look at is the width. So similar to the length, the width of the club narrowed down over time, and then it got a little bigger, but definitely not as big as the earlier clubs. It got a little wider at the end of the long nose era, where we're talking around 1885 or so. The other thing to look at is the horn thickness. The horn is very thick on the oldest clubs, and Hugh Philp in particular would use very thin horn, almost sometimes 1/8 of an inch. So that's another thing to look at. The neck width also. The neck tends to be very thick on the oldest clubs, and they got thicker again over time with the later clubs. Now, why was there a change here? So there's a change from the feather ball to the gutty ball because the gutted percha ball was very hard and it took its toll on clubs. So the necks got a little thicker, the heads got a little higher, the heads got a little deeper, not much, but a little bit deeper. So that helped give you a more robust club. And I think with these other clubs, why did they decrease, even though they still used feather ball? Why did the size tend to decrease over time? I think the club makers just distilled what they thought was the essence of what needed to be there. Well, trying to get all of the head weight behind here and get rid of all of the unnecessary weight. And they kind of pushed the limits. These clubs are pretty graceful. And this is what kind of got me interested in looking at these clubs, saying, how on earth did that club survive? Well, most of mine survive, some don't, but you can see, I mean, here you don't really have to worry too much about the club breaking quite as much. These were more like bludgeoning instruments. The swing weights were off the scale, and the length of the clubs changed also. The troon club, or the very old club, is much longer, sometimes 6 inches longer shaft. And then the clubs tended to decrease in length over time, up through the 1880s. But the biggest, I would say, like from 1770s or 1750s to 1800, they really started to decrease in size. And let's see, the lead, here you can see the lead is protruding out. And that was something you saw in the oldest clubs. Here, not so much, although it should have on this club. I should have had it more on this club, but I made the club too heavy, and they tend to get almost flush with the surface on the newer clubs. So you can see here. So I made a graph
which shows the trends of the measurements and the characteristics of the golf clubs over time from 1750 to around 1900. And we have various characteristics: the overall head length, not the overall club length, shaft length, head width, horn thickness, neck width, face height. So for example, the easy one, let's start with the shaft length. That's the one in red. It just continues to get shorter and shorter, like I showed over here. And then we have the length of the head. So we're talking this length here, and that got shorter over time. And then for about 30 years, from 1850 to 1880, it didn't get much shorter, maybe a trickle shorter. And then in the 1880s, it really started to drop down and got shorter. So you see these squatter clubs, kind of more like modern or post 1900 wooden heads. And the face height changed from maybe a little more than an inch to less than an inch to more than an inch, and then at the end it started to get pretty high. So that's F here, face height. And then neck width. So the necks got thinner as we got to the end of the featherball era, and then when they realized the clubs kept breaking with the gutta percha era, the necks got thicker again. So that's N here. And horn thickness, we mentioned, that's 1/4 of an inch thick. And Philp, not, although he was kind of an anomaly, Philp, you had horn that was only 1/8 of an inch thick. And in fact, if we look at the clubs, the horn is actually completely different. It's a giveaway here. This is a very long horn with 4 pegs. So if you see 4 pegs on a club, that's an indication, if it's not a fake, that it's old. And then if you see brass on the bottom, that came along around the 1880s or so. And then these have more traditional bottoms to them, I would say, with 3 pegs in them. But there's the horn thickness there. You can see it's not as thick as that Troon club over there. And the lead weight, let's see, I'm sorry, the head width we talked about also. The head got thinner as we went to the, let's see, blue line. So there's the blue line, and then it gets thicker again, or wider again. Sorry, head width, yes, H, right. It gets wider again. So that was just a little summary. Hopefully it'll help you date your antique golf clubs and get an idea of how old those wooden golf clubs are.